A historic day for Cuba and the U.S. The Cuban flag now flies outside its U.S. Embassy in Washington, D.C., a sight not seen in more than 50 years. The U.S. also reopened its embassy in Havana. Michael Voss will break down the events in just a moment, but first we go straight to Roy Ruttenberg, who is live outside the Cuban embassy here in Washington. A historic day. You've been there for most of it. What's the mood like? How did it go?
Indeed, Phil, and I think a lot of these people here had actually never even seen the Cuban embassy flying here in the U.S., much less knew what it looked like. There's a lot of people here stopping and taking pictures, some Cuban music playing, a really festive environment. In the morning it was also festive, but a lot more ceremonial, historic ceremony. These Cuban military personnel came out in a very pomp and circumstance-like ceremony. They raised that flag, which hadn't been here in more than 50 years. The embassy, the building, had been here. It was the Cuban interest section under the guardianship, if you will, of the Swiss. It was run by Cuban officials who, because of the Swiss umbrella, had diplomatic immunity. But now, once again, it is a full-fledged embassy. Now, after the ceremony here, the Cuban Foreign Minister, Bruno Rodriguez, who oversaw the ceremony, in another historic event, went to the State Department and met with the American Secretary of State, John Kerry, and what was told was a substantive meeting. Afterwards, they spoke with the press and admitted there are still a number of issues to resolve. Let's have a listen.
I emphasize that the totally lifting of the blockade, the return of the legally occupied territory of Guantanamo, as well as the full respect for the Cuban sovereignty and the compensation to our people for human and economic damages are crucial to be able to move towards the normalization of relations.
The President has called on Congress to lift the embargo. And it is our hope that over the course of the development of the relationship in these next weeks and months and years, and hopefully not too many years, that people will begin to see the benefits that are emerging in both countries as a result of this change today.
Bruno Rodriguez and John Kerry there. Phil, you can see there's still a lot that remains to be resolved, but both sides are very excited about what's happened here on Monday. Remember, this was announced, the intentions were announced back in December, and the two countries shocked much of the world making this announcement really out of the blue. They acknowledged the opening of the embassies is another step in the direction towards fully normalized relations between these two capitals, which are just so close to each other here in the Americas.
Hey, Roy, for our viewers behind you, we see quite the scene there. There's people obviously there, some perhaps protesters, some supporters, and probably a number of curious tourists. But all this is not without controversy. There are critics. Share with us that side of the story.
Indeed, and remember, this is 16th Street, so straight down to my right. It dead ends at the White House. Its close proximity is not really lost on anyone. The people outside here are mostly supporters of the embassy being opened. They are celebrating and they are calling for that embargo to be lifted. But there are critics, many of them Republican lawmakers. Remember, the Republicans control both houses of the U.S. Congress, and some, like Senator Marco Rubio, who is a Cuban American who is running for president as a Republican, has promised that if he would win, he would shut the Cuban embassy and, quote, turn back the clock. That is some of the resistance that the Obama administration has been expecting to meet and will likely continue to meet in the coming weeks. Critics say that the Cuban government, led by the Castro brothers over the decades, hasn't done enough to address the concerns raised by Washington. Namely, they point out Cuba's human rights records. And the types of criticisms that we've heard are, we understand, preventing the Obama administration from putting forth a nominee for a new ambassador to Havana. They say they don't want to see the Senate, led by the Republicans, blocking that nomination. Phil?
Yeah, this has been very emotional since the very beginning. Roy Ruttenberg, thank you very much getting us started. Let's go straight to the